Skims, fobs, and press and go. First thing to come to mind when you say any of that is what? Your car? Well, believe it or not, there's a lot of people that have really big misconceptions on what they are. And it's mostly people that, they buy a new car and they want this feature where they can push a button to start the car, or they want this remote that can start their car. And I've seen many times where people try to order their own key fob or transmitter or skim key, and they will order the wrong thing, or they'll basically go through a whole list of stressful situations trying to figure out what their car has, because they don't know what it is. All they know is it's got buttons on it, and they don't know if it fails. They don't know what actually failed on it. They don't know if it's the remote. They don't know if it's the battery. They don't know if it's another component. Well, the three main types that you have, I'm only going to talk about these three. You have a skim key, which is generally what cars between, I want to say, especially in America, between early 2000s, as I want to say, some late 19. Those are keys specifically if you really want to think about it. Think about GM, I think it's GM, where they had a key with a little resistor on the end of it. That was the earliest form of a skim key, where it basically just sends resistance. The next step up from that is an actual key with a chip inside of the top half of it. Now, this is not to be confused with newer cars that have a chip in the key with the buttons on it that looks like a regular key. That is not a skim key. That is a key fob. Your next step up is that. A chip in the key is up to an actual key fob. Now, a key fob can be in different forms. It could be a regular key with a key fob with an actual fob, a frequency operated button that's on the top of the key. Generally speaking, if you know what a Toyota Matrix is, that has the buttons on the end of it, where the key itself has the unlock and lock buttons and panic button already on the key itself, that is what you actually have a fob key. Now, you also have this thing called a fob, which is still a frequency operated button, but it's not a fob key. For instance, alright, how about this? Alright, this is my Nissan Altima key. This key here has a chip in it. It's just a regular skim key. It's not a key fob. It's not a fob. It's not a press and go transmitter. All it is a skim key. This operates whether or not it has a battery in it or not. This is also my Nissan Altima fob. This is the actual frequency on button that unlocks and locks the door and panics. This is just a regular key with a red cap on it. That's all it is. The difference between this and my Nissan key is that my Nissan key has an actual chip in it that only gets power and transmits frequency once it's in the ignition. Your next step up is also your key fob. Now, a very, very common misunderstanding is that you need a battery in your, well, if your battery dies in your key fob, you can't start your car. That is a myth with 90, maybe 95% of cars out there. The reason being is that if you don't have a good battery in it, your car will still start. What you will not have is your FOB part of your key, which is your unlock and lock button features. However, you still can stick your key in the ignition and it'll still start it, because the only time your car reads that ignition, well, reads that key, is when it's in the ignition. That's your key fob. That third most common now feature on a car is push and go, where you just get in the car as long as the key on you and you press it and you're ready to rock and roll. Well, this does not work like a key fob. This is where a lot of people don't, especially I have someone else that has a flooded truck just like me, and they're working on it. Theirs has the push and go, and the misconception that he had was that his button, that his transmitter, he has a transmitter. It's not a fob. It's a transmitter. Although it does have buttons on it to operate as a fob, it's actually a transmitter. Now, this is the difference between the two. A fob key, which is what your general key is now, where it doesn't look like a key, where you have to pull this little mechanism or something to get the actual key out. If you have to stick your key into the ignition switch and turn it, whether it's an actual key or a piece of plastic that has a chip in it, that is a key fob, not an actual transmitter. Now, your actual transmitter are typically, you have 3 receivers. You have a short range receiver, a long range receiver, and you'll have a front receiver and a back receiver, where one of them will double as your long range or short range. The RAM has a receiver in the back, a receiver in the front, and your RFH receiver. Now, your transmitter is what you would associate with Tesla, where you would walk up to the car, it would come on, it would open the door for you. That is a transmitter. You can get those same systems on less expensive cars like Rams, Silverados, I want to say even all the way down to like your Camrys, your Tauruses, your Focuses. You can get that, but they won't open the door for you like a Tesla would. You can get them to where when you walk up to the car and you touch the car, it'll come on. Usually it's a button on the handle that you still have to press, and if you have the key on you, it'll detect it and it'll open the door. But again, that's a transmitter. Your regular fob key will not do that. Your fob key is literally a substitute for an actual key, is what it is. It's a fancy key is all your fob is. Your fob key is a fancy key. That's all it is. It's not a transmitter. The only part of your fob key that's a transmitter is your fob section of it that actually unlocks and locks the doors. Now, you can get a system set up to where if you use your fob key where you can start it and it'll, you can do remote start. But the way those work is, I actually had to explain this very deeply to him. If you have a regular key fob, not a transmitter, an actual key fob, and you get remote start, that does not make your key fob a transmitter. This is the way these systems work. When you have that, is this: once you install that logic box or whatever it is that you have to your ignition system, what it does is, once you, I think if you add it to it, like if you add a remote start to the RAM and you use your factory key fob without getting the transmitter, if you double tap the lock button, it will start the truck. This does not make your fob key a transmitter. All it did was send a signal through its normal fob to the receiver to tell it to lock the doors. Now, the logic box that's inside, attached to your ignition, sees the 2 lock sequences in order within a certain time frame and understands that, okay, I'm being requested to, to run the system. And it'll turn the ignition on, it'll start the vehicle, and it'll run. The reason it can do this is because it has what it does, it already has the key ignition code that your fob key has. It's stored into that microprocessor. And what it does is that while it's running, it temporarily gives that signal to your RF receiver, to your body control module, to your PCM, your TCM, anybody in your network that needs that key to be able to run the vehicle. All of those get a temporary, the temporary code sent to them to allow the vehicle to run. And after a certain amount of time length, or you cancel it yourself, it gives that signal until that time, and it'll shut off. That does not make it a frequency transmitter for your press and go where you push the button. Even then, you can add the feature to your vehicle in most cases, and that still doesn't make your vehicle having a transmitter. What that usually does, the way those systems usually work, is the same way as a microprocessor. But I'm not mistaken, they actually go a little bit more technical with it and make you install an additional frequency receiver, or maybe two, and allow you to do the same thing. Now, if you do not get the one where you replace your key fobs with a transmitter, you generally end up having to add the button to your vehicle. But what this button does, this button is your key fob now. This button gets programmed to your vehicle, and when you get in and you push the button, and it'll start. But that button is now your key, not your key fob. There is a little bit of a gimmick with that. It's not as secure, because technically, if you don't get the I don't know how it works on the more expensive kits, but the cheaper kits, even if as long as you don't have the key, you can still start the vehicle, because that button that you can take out, that you actually install, is your key now. So you can walk up to it and press it and start and drive away, even if you leave your key at home and lock yourself out. But I think the more expensive ones make you replace the frequency, well, not replace the frequency transmitter, make you add one or two more frequency transmitters, and then make you replace your actual key fob with a transmitter. But I do know the cheaper ones actually have you install a button and install a microprocessor and let you press and go. But again, even if you don't have your key on you, you can still start the car. That's the way those actually work. So those are your three types that you have in retrospect. You have now you do have it a little bit more advanced where you can use your cell phone, but in your general everyday car that anyone is going to walk up to on the showroom floor and buy, you're going to get a key fob, you're going to get a Skim key, or you're going to get a transmitter. That's one of the three things you're going to get. And here's the thing, transmitters work one of two ways. You've got a transmitter that will always transmit, or you'll have the vehicle always looking for this signal from the transmitter, like your tire pressure monitor system, where it's always looking at it. Or you'll have one that only transmits when you like when you push the button on the door handle, and as soon as you push the button, now it looks for this signal. Generally speaking, your Tesla one, if I'm not mistaken, the Tesla always looks for the signal, and once it detects that key, it opens up and does all that. But those are your big differences of the three. I laughed when he was telling me about this, because I swore I thought he was kidding with me when he thought that, well, he couldn't differentiate between the three. But yeah, a Skim key is basically a regular key, which is this, which is like my Nissan Altima key, not Altima, my Nissan Pathfinder key, which is a Skim key. It actually has a chip in it. Now, here's the thing. This is my RAM key. This is not a Skim key. This is something that manufacturers used to do. Put a fancy plastic piece over the actual key to make it seem like you got something special. That's just a regular key. And then you have a actual Skim key. And then you have your actual key fob. I mean your actual fob, not your key fob. Your actual fob. And then your... Oh, God. And then your actual key fob are the ones that have a key that actually has the fob built into it. Now, a key fob that you come with some new cars aren't actually key fobs. It's just a fob that happens to have a hideaway key in it. That is not a key fob. That is a regular fob that has a hideaway key in it. Now, your actual key fob is like what Toyota uses, and I think most of their cars, where you actually have to hold the key in your hand, and the actual key that goes into the ignition is actually what you use to push the buttons. And then you have your transmitter, where all of your really fancy cars all have, where some of them have it to where you still have to take that little transmitter and stick it in your stick it somewhere in the car for it to activate. Even though that's acting as a key fob, it's still a transmitter. It doesn't have to physically go anywhere into the vehicle. You know, as far as putting it in and turning it, it just has to be there to start the vehicle, or it has to be nearby the vehicle to start the vehicle. The transmitters are the only ones that can do that. Your fobs and your key fobs have to be in the ignition for it to start, and just like your Skim keys, they have to be in there to start. And you know, if you have a regular key, you already know how that works. So the only keys that you can actually bypass are the standard keys and your Skim keys that use a resistor. Older GMs use this, are the only ways you can bypass those. The ones that have the chip in it, the only way you can bypass it is actually tricking the computer. Tricking the computer as far as going into it and programming another key, or getting another key that's programmed forward and doing it that way. Otherwise, you are not driving that vehicle legally. But those are what we have. Those are the differences. I'm tired. I want to go home.